next presentation, dual presentation from Bruno and Ronak. I think Bruno is going to provide a little bit of context and introduction to the work that Ronak's been doing. And it kind of leads on work around more of answering some of these spatial resolution questions and starting to move past the kind of single node models for South Africa. Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us today at this cool event. So as Peter mentioned, I'll just be doing a few slides as an intro to Ronak, where he'll be presenting the work he's doing for his master's, which is a multi-node production model for South Africa. So our main model that we work with, that I work with in our group is this one, Saturn GE.
How do we hide this?
Left corner, try left corner. Just click on the left corner.
Just click on the presentation now.
Okay, I'll just leave it.
I don't have stuff at the top. So Saturn G is made up of two components. It's on the left hand side, it's a times model, which is a full sector model. So it's not just the power sector, but also has the other demand sectors and supply sectors included. And then on the right hand side, a general equilibrium model that we run interactively. It has so it's calibrated on the full energy balance, the GHG and national GHG inventory, and the equilibrium model is calibrated on the social accounting matrix. And what this tool is useful for is like getting a bit more than just the cost information or the price information, but it's also getting some of the socio-economic impacts of what's happening in the energy sector. So if you're just using a CG model by itself, then you don't have the resolution. The energy model is too simplistic. And if you're just using the energy model, you don't have the socioeconomic stuff. You only have the cost information. So by combining them, you can get kind of a more rich, kind of full economic impact of what's happening in the energy sector. And the kind of results you can get out is, for example, this one showing on the y-axis the GDP impact of increasing ambition. So in his introductory slide earlier, you see like a cost impact, system cost, or a tariff impact. Here we can kind of get a little bit more. And then here, because we're carrying in the CG, we have a full input-output representation of the economy, which is dynamically updated over time. We can calculate the carbon embedded carbon of our consumed goods, our exported goods, and that we can use that to see kind of our risk to exposure to border tax adjustments in our kind of trading partners. So this is a kind of a sketch representation of the full sector model as opposed to just the power sector model. So in the power sector model, you have the power plants represented, and in some cases the upstream fuel supply chain, and the electricity demand is kind of an exogenous assumption that you have to get from somewhere else. When you're working with the full sector model, you're driving from things that are more aligned to your drivers, which is a kind of economic activity and income. And then from there you have kind of competition happening on the demand side between different technologies, which also allows you to take into account of the existing stock of technologies and how that existing stock will retire over time, and then giving space for your new technologies to come in. And we can kind of represent certain sectors in quite a lot of detail, and having competition and also kind of representation of the existing stock and its retirement profile. Here, for example, we have the iron and steel sector representation in the model, including kind of the new hydrogen-based production. We also have a detailed vehicle park model characterized with lots of different vehicle classes, which allows us kind of to phase in our kind of electrification or hydrogenation of the trade sector. And the full inventory allows you to kind of have the emissions at either IPCC or down to kind of plant level or whatever resolution you have in terms of your technology representation. Zooming into the electricity, so we have kind of a full bottom-up explanation of where all its demand is coming from by sector or by kind of by end use. These are annual flows, and we have it also at a kind of a sub-annual flow. And here you notice we're actually got quite a coarse representation of. So we've got 2 seasons represented. On the x-axis, going from 1 to 24. So we've got 2 hour kind of average summer day, average winter day, and that we calibrate to the base year, and kind of moving forward as the mix of end uses change, we get kind of an impact on the profile. But in this model where we've kind of favored the macro picture and having the full sector and GHG inventory, we've compromised on the spatial and time on temporal resolution. And when we want to analyze kind of net zero by 2050, like we're doing at the moment, with scenarios that don't include a lot of CCS, we have to kind of up our game and increase the temporal and spatial resolution, which is at the moment we're doing it kind of as a check. So we run this thing as an expansion model at a coarse resolution, and then pick certain years and freeze the capacity in a dispatch model, Flextool, which is an open source production optimization software, which allows for multi-node. And yeah, so Ronak through his masters now is expanding spatially, and we're going with 11 nodes at the moment because running, I mean, the PyPSA 27 node was a very attractive option, but if the computational requirements were too high, and the turnaround time and the skills that we had at the time when we made that decision wasn't kind of matching. So we went with a coarser model with the aspiration of one day increasing the spatial resolution of our full sector model to that 11 node, which is aligned conveniently with the kind of provincial boundaries, as Ronak will explain. So Ronak now, taking over from me, will kind of go into work he's done on describing the current network, and some preliminary work on how the network would look in 2031.
Thanks, Bruno. Thanks, guys, for having us here. So I'll start by giving a brief overview of the current South African electricity system. So we see that currently we do have around 35 gigawatts of peak demand, and most of it is located in the northern side of the country, as opposed to the southern side by a split of roughly 80-20%, 80 to 20%. And similarly, for the generation side, we see that most of our coal plants is located in Mpumalanga, which is again in the northern side, and the split again roughly corresponds to around 80-20, favoring the northern side of the country. So the powerful dynamics, it's basically from the northern side circularly passing towards the southern side of the country. However, in 2030 South Africa forecast, and this is in the GCCA report as well, we see that the demand split would remain the same with a roughly 80-20 split. However, the generation is more focused towards the southern side of the country, majority in the Greater Cape areas, so Northern Cape, Western Cape, Eastern Cape areas. So with this split, we can see that there is a problem of power flow dynamics, and this would need to have an increased flexibility due to the high renewable shares in the country. And so some of the ways I've used to tackle this, it's either to relocate the potential renewable plants to another location. So we currently know that Northern Cape is highly constrained, so we can either relocate potential plants which were going to be in Northern Cape to other locations with lesser yield, lesser capacity factor, or we can have those plants in Northern Cape and expand the transmission lines to have further upstream network strengthening. And now coming to the Flextool modeling. coming to the Flextool modeling. So Flextool is an open source energy modeling software which helps to assess flexibility in power systems, and it's node based. So each node can either represent a region, area, or country. And for our case, we are representing each of those nodes as 11 supply areas, as mentioned in the GCCA reports. So those 11 supply areas are the 9 provinces plus Peli and Hydra cluster. And for each of those nodes, you can specify its generation, its demand time series, coal prices as well, and the node-to-node transfer between those supply areas. However, in Flextool, when we have those node-to-node transfer capacities allocated, it only allocates it in terms of megawatts. So we had to convert the kilovolt lines into its respective megawatt capacities. And we used the surge impedance loading parameter to do that. And we had consulted Ronald Murray as well. And so we are using the surge impedance loading to convert the existing kV lines into megawatts so that we can allocate that per supply area for the model for the 11 supply areas. And so this is a snippet of the source data. So this was found in the GCCA interactive maps, and I've just summarized it in a pivot table. So basically we have so in this pivot map, let me just start with here. So this is basically a high level overview of my 11 supply areas. However, in the model, we are using 10 suppliers and not 11 because we don't have enough data for Peli. So we are including Peli with Limpopo, so it's a 10 node system. And so this shows the node to node transfer capacities in terms of megawatts instead of the kV lines. And we used the surge impedance loading formula to convert that. And sorry, we do have enough time, so let me just come to the case studies now. So for the case studies I'll be using for my master's model, I've basically allocated 4 different case studies, where the first case study would just be based on renewable energy relocation and not having transmission expansion or battery storage capacities. The second one would be to have a transmission expansion. Sorry, the second one would be to have a transmission expansion without battery storage, and this would affect the relocation as well, because in the first one, without expansion, we can't allocate more generation to Northern Cape, for example, whereas this would unlock the Northern Cape capacity, and thus the allocation would change as well. Then in the third case study, it feeds to the location and expansion in case study 2, but with battery storage capacities. And the third alternative case is an increased capacity for the batteries. And for all these case studies, the renewable energy capacity that is added to the system for 2031 scenario is constant. So we are using the allocated IRP capacities, which is around 26 gigawatts for renewables by the year 2030. So that allocation would remain same. So that capacity would remain the same, but the allocations for different cases would change. And for each of the parameters, for each of the cases, sorry, we will be using these parameters to visualize the system much better. So the first 4 would be analyzed in Flextool, and a part of my master's would be to carry out power systems analysis in Dix Island as well. So the parameters load flow analysis and transient stability analysis will be carried out in Dix Island. So just to show some of the aspect, like the data we gathered from the TDP report. So for the 2031 scenario, we see that per supply area, we are using the moderate high scenario in the TDP report. So TDP had 4 different scenarios, and we're using the moderate high scenario, which allocates around 42,000 megawatts of peak demand. And as mentioned earlier, for the generation mix in South Africa, we are using the IRP, which is allocated in the IRP, but it doesn't state how the allocation would be in the IRP. So that's one of the things which would be carried out in my master's. And the allocation criteria we have figured is to use and rank them according to their respective capacity factors. And the capacity factors allocated for solar is extracted from Renewables Ninja. And for wind, we're using the 2012 CSR ESCOM, and we're using the 2012 ESCOM and CSR data for wind. And we're allocating, we're basically ranking each of these based on their number of capacity, based on the percentage of capacity factors. And based on this, we based on this rank, we allocate how much of capacity would go into individual supply areas per se. So, and for the transmission expansion, this is basically the second case study, and it fits to the third alternative case study. We are adding, so 2280 megawatts corresponds to around 1765 kV line. So we are basically strengthening the Greater Cape area with 6 765 kV lines and 1 400 kV line between Northern Cape and Hydro Cluster. So this is basically a high-level overview of our methodology of how we are going forward with the multi-node system in Flextool.